In a world where most people watch movies and then forget about them, these brave heroes join forces to watch them again and then talk about them. Join them in their epic journey as they go back in time, a decade and beyond, to revisit and break down films from a vast array of genres. Do these movies hold up over time? Are they classics? Find out on Retro Movie Roundtable. Starring your hosts, Bryan Frye, Chad Robinson, Dustin Melbardis, Lizzie Haynes, and Russell Guest. Coming now to headphones in your ears.
Welcome, all you lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable, where we watch movies and then talk about them. I'm your host, Dustin Melbardis, and joining me today in the young winter. It's getting cold out there, y'all. What a great way to warm up with a hot chocolate or a hot toddy. With my friend and yours, Bryan Frye in Spokane, Washington. Bryan, say hello.
Good evening. If you don't like making a drink, straight whiskeys always work.
Straight whiskey always works. And who else do we have? Why, it's the cinnamon stick in your apple cider from Louisville, Kentucky. It's Lizzie Haynes.
Hi, everybody. Oh, you know what? On the topic of hot toddies and whiskey, check out Peter E. Hart if you're living in Kentucky, in stores probably by the time we're listening to this.
Wow, that's a new bourbon out there in Kentucky. Ready for all those people that were clamoring for that Christmas gift. What are you going to get? Your uncle you can't buy anything for. Say the name again, Lizzie.
It is Peter E. Hart. There's a rye whiskey and a wheated bourbon.
Oh, wonderful.
Go get you one.
Is that that's the motto? That's the slogan?
Our slogan is steeped in history, always evolving.
No, it's go get you one now.
Go get you one.
That's what it is.
All one word, so it sounds almost Native American. Go get you one.
Yeah. Oh, yes, the elder of the Go Get You Ones. Two other hosts joining me. Well, that must mean it's a dealer's choice episode. That's right, folks. Tonight, you get to journey into the twisted mind of Sir Dustin. What is this guy thinking when he picks these? We'll figure it out later. Let's start with our warm-up questions. Bryan, we cover and watch a lot of movies, but what's a movie you would want to be on set for to see it being made?
I would love to be on set for something like Inception. There's these idea movies like Interstellar. Like, I'm going to go heavy on Christopher Nolan here, but there's just idea pieces that I hear about and how they come up with additionals, especially like with Matthew McConaughey's piece where he's trying to tell himself, don't go. And like, I would love just to see the artistic direction, not just from your director, from your ancillary off-camera personnel, but also your actors. There are those movies that just smack of a collusion of everyone present, and those are the
meeting
kind
of the
movies.
minds.
Those are the movies. The other one, I love the story that Matt Damon tells about The Departed when he's talking about. I don't know if you guys have seen this or not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where Nicholson shoots the if you let the scene keep going. Like, I would love to watch something like that. Like, that's one of those things where if you're a film lover and you like whatever, like, that's exactly what you want to see.
You'll see on a DVD special feature a zoom in and out from 50 feet away of George Lucas talking to the actor, and it's far away, and you see that they're working on something, but the audio isn't there, and that's that same feeling where it's like, I wonder what they're talking about right now.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how that is coming together in the scene. Well, same question for you, Lizzie. What's a movie you'd want to be on set for to see it being made?
Okay, so this is going to be a twofer because it's also the movie that I most recently watched, and that is the original Scream. I think it would be so much fun to be on set. My most recent watch of it was at a filming that was hosted by David Arquette, and it was so much fun. And I can get into that here in a little bit. But ultimately, hearing his stories about what it was like to work with Wes and how he was so kind and fun and funny and inspirational and just really took the time to get to know each and every one of his cast members. I feel like that would be so much fun to watch him interact with everybody and just make it fun. But Scream is my favorite franchise. So just to be able to watch, the actor that's done all the different phone calls, like watch that happen back behind the scenes and, watch Drew Barrymore on the phone and just like that entire interaction, to be able to kind of watch the behind the scenes and the front of the camera of her acting, all that, to see what we actually see at home. I think it would be just absolutely so much fun. And like watching Wes work with Matthew Lillard towards the end of the movie of like, did you really call the police? Like my mom and dad are going to be so mad at me.
I'm gonna be so mad at me.
I just think it would be such a fun, and that is like in so many ways one of my favorite movies. So it would just be so much fun to watch it get created.
There's many places that the lines are read. There's rehearsing, either solo or somebody else reading lines with you. But I imagine that there's got to be a very particular, unrepeatable feel of when a scene as written and as directed happens for the first time. That's got to like send ripples through the crew. That'd be so
Yes.
cool to see, especially with things like with reveals. Like with a big reveal, something like that. For me,
Yes.
I'm actually going. Aside from like story type things or idea type things, I'm going with kung fu here. I'd love to be on set for an Ang Lee movie, or I'd love to be on set for a Jackie Chan kung fu movie because he's such a warm, bright soul that everyone loves, like, universally. On top of that, he's got his 40 stuntmen that are like brothers to him. And I think all this
Mm.
stuff is like this could be very fun to see the process. So the
I thought
specific
I thought
movie.
Jackie was no stuntman, dude.
No, he doesn't need stuntmen. All of his guys are
Oh,
people
the
that are
guys he's fighting.
yeah, these are all
Oh,
like
gotcha.
a
Okay,
cadre of people that like have worked with him for years and years and years
gotcha.
in general. Yeah, but yeah, we covered it on the show, Legend of Drunken Master. I would have loved to see the way that those fight scenes are blocked. And actually, at the end of that movie, you will get beneath the credits, you'll see some of the slip ups and like when they actually hit each other really hard. Or I think Jackie Chan got hit with a burning piece of rebar, and it's like this is real. And so I think that'd be really cool to see like the action on site. Uh,
Yes.
Brian, what's the last movie you saw?
I watched Wolves.
Wolves. What is Wolves?
It's a Apple TV movie starring George Clooney and Brad Pitt.
Oh, yes. Okay. Now I know what you're talking about. Yes. Did you like
They're
it?
Oh my god, I loved it. So, like, I always enjoyed acting when I got the chance to do it. Like, it's a great thing, and I love George Clooney for what he does. Um, just based on my temperament and brain, I'm more of a Sam Rockwell, always trying to work toward a George Clooney. But I watched that whole movie and I was just like, this is just fun. You get the Ocean's 11 chemistry from Pitt and Clooney because they have a thing. And all that's awesome. But the movie is so, as Chad would say, this is a Fry movie. The movie is so much a me movie. So if you haven't watched, not Wolves, Wolves,
Wolves. Yeah,
watch
Wolves.
like
Wolves.
Okay.
like the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yes.
Wolves. Yeah. And Lizzie, you saw
FS,
Scream.
no comma.
You saw Scream most recently.
Yes.
We
It was so much fun. Like I said, Aaron had gotten me tickets to this special screening of Scream that was hosted by David Arquette. It was here in Louisville, and he did a panel afterwards. And I saw Scream 4, 5, and 6 in the theaters, and the other three, just based on my age, I watched at home. But 4, 5, and 6 I saw in theaters. I would have loved the opportunity to have seen the first one in theaters. But what was so much fun about this experience was that we were in a room exclusively with people that love Scream. Like
Yeah.
it was so much fun. And when like anytime that there was a big moment, the entire place started screaming and cheering. And it was so much fun. The energy in the room was like unparalleled. Like every single person was just so happy to be there, and everybody was just so excited. We got to meet David Arquette afterwards, and I got to give him a hug and take a picture with him. It was so much fun. He is, I would say, exactly what I expected him to be
That's great.
in like the best and worst ways. Like he's just like unbelievably goofy, but like more than anything, incredibly humble and kind. It was like a 10 out of 10 experience. We had the best night.
That's really cool because what you're describing sounds like fandom. A lot of
Yes.
people go to the movies as a pastime, or they want to see a film, or maybe they might be excited about a film. But when you go to a screening, 25, 27 years later, you're
Yeah.
going with fans. So you get
Yes.
to be a fan of that the same way you'd be a fan of your football team. Now, that's cool. For me, I'm actually catching up on our early year shows from early this year. So I just watched Halloween 3 Season of the Witch.
What did you think?
So my answer to this is I think the movie's bad, but I like it a lot.
I love it so much.
And you were on that show, Lizzie. I think Bryan,
Yes.
you weren't on the show.
No.
Dan,
No,
a
it's not.
returning guest, was on the show, and he likes it a lot. But it goes into my like I have a 4-box system. Is there's movies that are good, there's movies that are bad, there's movies you like, and there's movies you don't like. You
Mhm.
can like good movies, you can not like bad movies, but then you get those interesting ones where it's like, I think that movie's bad, but I like it. And
Yes.
I fall into the bias of maybe the only reason I think it's bad is because it's called Halloween 3. If it was just called something different, it'd be different. Like with the idea of it not having the characters we're used to seeing. But no, I was glad to watch it again. Well, speaking of interesting movies, we got one tonight. It's my dealer's choice. It's my dealer's choice. Lizzie, what are we watching tonight?
We are watching Pierrepoint.
Pierrepoint. I don't know if you guys ever heard of it before. I certainly hadn't before a few years ago. Pierrepoint from 2005, starring Timothy Spall, Juliette Stevenson, and Eddie Marsan. It commissioned as a television film in 2004. It had an estimated audience of 3.6 million. It was renamed Pierrepoint: The Last Hangman for the North American release. In the U.S., it only grossed $21,000, very limited release. It was popular on TV, I suppose. Number one movie that year was Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. The IMDb rating for Pierrepoint is 7.4. The critics' tomato meter for Rotten Tomatoes is 79%, and the audience score is 85%. So we're looking at people, critics, audience, watchers, who are scoring it relatively high. But this is also one of those things where I think that these numbers are a bit skewed. You have to go looking for this movie. You have to search for this movie. Or, like my two hosts, you have to be told you got to watch this movie. And that's how you get introduced to Timothy Spall led Pierrepoint. Bryan, I'm going to start with you. Have you seen this movie before?
Oh, absolutely not. In fact, it took a little bit of work to find it.
I think, Lizzie, you encountered that same thing too, right?
I sure did. I messaged everybody and was like, is this the movie I'm supposed to be watching? I can't find it anywhere. Where can I stream it? So yes, it did take a little bit of work to find it. Had never heard of it before either.
Yeah, and it actually took a little bit for me to find it as well. But what were you expecting coming in, Bryan?
Well, just seeing the visuals and whatnot that you get when you search for a movie, I have a weird thing where I'm not a huge fan of BBC TV,
Hmm.
but I'm a fan of the movies that they create. So there's I guess, a backing, the money they put into production that is typically lacking.
Mm-hmm.
This movie does a very good job of being less is more anyway, so it doesn't leave you feeling like you're being kept out of it.
Sure.
There's a movie I brought up during our best of 2014 called 71, and it's the same way where you have the opportunity to watch a movie, and I'm sure the budget wasn't super high, but they did a lot with what they had, and that's what this movie does.
Yeah, so you were familiar with BBC. You know, you only had limited information to see this. What's your first take on it?
I really enjoyed this film. This was almost like watching a dramatized documentary for me. I
Yeah.
really didn't watch this film like something I would see in theaters. I watched this film like something I would choose to watch as a like World War II adjacent dramatized documentary on Netflix. Like
Uh-huh.
that's how this felt for me.
Or you might watch this movie in a museum
Right.
or during your history class when they wheel the TV in. You know,
But
you might have something like that.
this is also something I feel like the Brits do very well when they make this sort of film. Is I felt more informed than entertained. But
It's interesting. Yeah.
information, I think, is maybe something I was looking for going into it. It was like having been something I'd never heard of or would have looked for. I was really looking for a this is how we got here, like a
Mhm.
step process. And even how the film takes you through his process is really important toward kind of getting the vibe that you get from the film. So
Mm.
yeah, I felt like instead of watching something made for my entertainment, it was really something that was made for my information that entertained
Yeah, you could almost say that like out of like a sliding scale where you've got a ton of movies where the drama is kicked up to 11. This is considered a drama, but you're kind of being told a story, information based almost, rather than big emotional swings. Like it's I can see exactly what you're saying. Lizzie, let's go with you. Had you seen this movie before?
Had never heard of it before. And I have to say, that's a really great way of looking at it. I hadn't been able to put my finger on how I would describe this movie. And I feel like you just did a perfect job. It really did feel like I was watching a scripted documentary. It was so interesting. And I was expecting something that was like kind of adjacent to the King's speech and the aspect of, especially, like given like the time frame. I'm always really fascinated and love the period pieces of like post World War II and in Europe. And I find that always like just super interesting. So I was really excited about it. But this particular idea of like these trials and like thinking about like the person that had to actually carry them out, I never really thought about that role. And I found this movie to be super interesting and really thought provoking. And I don't know, it tugged on my heartstrings a lot. Going into it, kind of like halfway through, you kind of ask that question of like, okay, like when's the other shoe going to drop where it's going to tell me what this, what kind of big thing is going
Inciting
to
incidents is
happen.
going to happen. Yeah, yeah. What's going to?
Yes, it
Yeah.
kind of be like, okay, this is what the focal point of the movie is going to be about. Oh, nope, it's going to be this, it's going to be that. And you never really quite get there because the whole point of the movie is just really trying to show you his kind of overarching journey rather than it, because most movies are about like one person that has like a couple of bad days, right? And you watch those bad days happen. And then, whereas like we're watching this person kind of have more of like an actual crisis of conscience and how it affects his life. And it's really very interesting.
I also think that it's really like traditionally British to not care about what happened to him before he takes up his position.
Mhm.
Like if
Yeah.
you watch movies like Darkest Hour, it's really not about whatever led him to his
Yeah, this
vocation.
isn't
It's about
Pierrepoint Begins. It's we don't.
yeah, this it's just here we'll take you right to the part that you care about. It has nothing to do with whatever happened before he was who.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is a shocker for you guys, but I had actually never seen it either. I love bringing a movie to the dealer's choice where I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know if it's going to be any good. I like playing around with my dealer's choices. This was recommended to me by a guy at a bar, and I was just talking about how I like
Perfect.
Timothy Spall, and he said, "You know what? He's always these character actors, but he's actually the leading man in this movie from 2007. It was 2005, 2006, somewhere in that region." And that's when I learned about it. So I got to share it with you guys and get to share it with the audience. I enjoyed it. I agree with your assessment about the when's the other shoe gonna drop? And well, it kind of doesn't. Lizzie, sometimes you use the term slice of life, and in reality, what we
Mm-hmm.
get, this is just it's not a slice, it's the whole cake. You see it
Yes.
all, and it's linear in progression, and you get it all facets of it. And it's interesting. I didn't realize. I think this is the third biopic I have selected in my time on the show. And I didn't know that would be like, oh, that's one of Dustin's things. But I think my very first dealer's choice was Stand and Deliver. And so, like, these kind of biopic movies, you are in for something a little bit different. And I think as long as you're prepared for it, we aren't doing a Tom Cruise action. It's not going to be some big, wondrous thing on screen. And the time period assists with that. But we're just kind of looking at this progression through life. Like I said, I did enjoy it, and I will have to talk about it more after the break. Is kind of the importance of this movie or this person. It was all kind of new to us. But if you haven't seen from 2005 Pierrepoint, we're going to take a little break, and when we come back, Bryan is going to give us a plot summary. Make sure you pause us and go watch this movie and come back and listen to it. See you on the other side.
Welcome to the All 80s Movies Podcast.
I'm Bill.
And I'm Jason. And this is the podcast where we talk about the blockbusters, the flops, and everything in between from one of the freshest decades for movies, the 1980s. So whether you're a brain, a jock, a valley girl, or a Jedi, we've got some 80s classics for you.
Do these movies stand the test of time? Are we discovering something new? Is there an 80s movie we're finally watching for the first time?
Join us each week as we dive into the cinematic nostalgia that inspired and influenced a generation. From the hits to the cult classics, we'll discuss our earliest memories, favorite scenes, fun facts, and our not-so-favorite movie moments too.
It's the All 80s Movies Podcast, now available on all major streaming platforms. Please subscribe and happy listening.
And we are back. This is your final warning. It is time for us to reveal the plot of from 2005's Pierrepoint. So this is your last chance. Pause us if you haven't seen it. But Bryan, take it away.
Albert Pierrepoint has a dream to follow in his father's footsteps of public service and become an executioner for the crown. After applying, it quickly comes out that not only is he a natural, but possibly the best in the world, coming up with a formulaic way to kill inmates more humanly without suffering. After having success at both his vocation and finding love, he is approached by none other than Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery to come to Germany and hang some Nazis. Now, at this point, Albert has remained completely anonymous in his work, a fact that is built into his formula of doing his job so well. However, after tackling the Herculean job of hanging so many Nazis, he returns home to find himself quite the national hero, a fact that makes him quite uncomfortable. As his 15 minutes of fame erodes to constant and recurring bouts of the populace calling him out as a murderer, and the prisons with which he serves continuously making alterations to his formula he finds both distasteful and unacceptable, even to the point of not paying him, he had the brutal task of executing his best friend. In the end, he resigns his position and ends his illustrious career, having executed a total of 600 prisoners.
And we are given that statement at the end where they say like this was kind of his life's work. The colon subtitle to this is the last executioner. He's not technically the last one. He was the person who carried out the execution of the last female execution in the United Kingdom, which is shown in the movie. Speaking of things that are shown in the movie, a lot of what is shown, it's pretty accurate when you read about who Albert Pierrepoint was. And like I said, it wasn't something that I chose that I would be like the biopic guy, but I had to learn more about the truth about this. And a lot of it is true. And man, if you you must have watched the movie by now if you're still listening to us, but you wait for that other shoe to drop. He has to kill his best friend. Now, that's pretty serious zag in a movie where I would say it was kind of routine what we were watching was his process and routine throughout his service to His Majesty, being on a list of executioners who would then be called to prisons to do this job, and to do it for so long in his life. He said he found love. An interesting movie, and pretty accurate. I'm going to start with the basics. Lizzie, have you ever watched or even read any media about a hangman before?
Never. No, never. I know that capital punishment is not a complete thing of the past, but I've never really like stayed abreast to it. So no, like this was something that was completely foreign to me, and I know that of course, like these things happened, and I had just, earlier before the plot summary, I was talking about how much I enjoy learning about post World War II. And of course, I knew that these things happened, but you never really. And one thing, it's part of what I enjoyed about the movie is like, it's interesting to see like the man behind the curtain and kind of a way of being like, we know that these executions happened and we know that
Mm-hmm.
somebody is carrying them out, but who is carrying them out and how does he feel about the fact that he is the person pulling the crank? How does he feel about all of that? I feel like that part was super interesting.
We made it 30 something years without having to ask this question of ourselves, like,
Yes.
yeah.
Like how does that make you feel? Like how were you feeling about it? At first he's very kind of like, this is my job. Like I'm Albert. He like says like,
Yeah.
I'm Albert and I'm going home. I'm going to go to the pub and hang out with Tish. And then, by the end of the movie, he realizes that, he kind of has this big call out of being able, well, at least when they kill people, they're doing it out of passion or rage. I'm doing it for money. And it's really interesting to see the trajectory of how he feels about it. But I've honestly never given it a second thought. So this was a totally thought-provoking movie for me in that way.
Yeah, Bryan, same question here is with the idea of it being a subject that hasn't got a lot of coverage.
Yeah, definitely. Outside of the historical facts, there's reasons that executioners always wore black masks over their face, so people didn't know who was actually killing the person. I mean, you look at guys with swords, guys with axes.
Yeah.
Whoever was swinging the axe was usually masked in some way to prevent backlash on them, or shade thrown on their character by being someone who killed someone. Um, uh, in terms of this guy for this time, this is a public service. Like
Right. He's
I don't
in
mean to
service.
be glib about this. It's just like he was doing a public service for his country at the time when this was permissible. We can look back on it now and be like, oh, how about barbaric? But that doesn't change the fact that at that point in time, people were giving him high fives in pubs when it was a Nazi. Like you don't get to cherry pick this stuff.
Yeah.
So, like for me, this is I've got no criticism for a guy who made his living throwing the switch because he neither did the crime nor passed the sentence. This is just a guy throwing a switch that has some baggage to it.
Yeah.
Like he is being paid to hold the baggage of other people's.
The will of government must
Yes,
be wielded through
a person.
a man.
Like
Yeah,
he
a person.
literally has nothing to like. All these people that are like, please save my kid. No, like, what do you think I do here? Like, literally have nothing to do with how your kid, your son, your daughter, whatever got here.
Yeah.
I'm literally there to give him him or her, an honorable death, which he actually does remarkably well. Like like the thing I really applaud about. I don't want to call it the character. I know it's a real person.
Right. Right.
What I really applaud about the person is his earnestness about saying this person has now paid for their crimes. Now we give them
Yes.
dignity after the fact. So not only do I not criticize him for what he's doing, I applaud him for the dignity in which he does it and the dignity that he affords his fallen.
I had wanted to ask you this, Lizzie. I feel as if the deference, the honor, the routine for Albert Pierrepoint is about respect, and for his position, and for just sort of the grave weight of what the subject of this movie is. I thought that was, at first, I thought the movie was maybe taking us in a strange direction with focusing on the speed. Did you feel as if some of the conversation with his assistant executioners and other people that have been, like the governor of the prison, were they're like, oh, that's a record, 7.5 seconds, or I'm gonna beat my dad's average of 13 seconds. For a second there, I thought this movie is maybe barking up the wrong tree. But I think in time, in totality, the movie shows you that this is all about how this man, based on a real person, is holds his position in such high honor that it needs to be precise.
Yes, I think, yeah, I think I'm imagine that it was intentional to start with details that were potentially going to keep you on your toes enough, even if it was in
Oh, good point.
a negative way, to say like I need to figure out what's going on here. Like my curiosity is piqued because I need to know why he's caring about his time, because I remember really feeling that way too. And and as you're watching it, you're thinking like, okay, like this is still like criminal or not. It's, in my mind, I was like, this still like kind of feels icky to be talking about
Right.
like how impressed we are that we're able to like crack the vertebrae and all of that. And like, it's such a quick moment. And you're just like, oh, it just kind of feels like a little bit like dissecting frogs, kind of, but on like a much grander scale. And so there was a part of it that felt kind of icky to me, but then everything changed for me when he went in the scene where he went to Germany, when he's doing his due diligence, he's doing the job that he has been called to do, and he has been called to execute 13 people that day, and there are not enough coffins. And the soldier at the time is like, oh, we'll just like figure it out. We'll just kind of like, for lack of a better word, he's like, we'll just dispose them somewhere
Yeah,
else.
we were told to
And
throw him in a plot with no coffin, no grave, nothing. Yeah.
yes, and like to bring up the quote that Bryan said, it was like, no, 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 like that's absolutely, we cannot do that. Like his debt has been paid, so now we need to treat what's left with him with some dignity. And I loved that scene because that felt to me like, okay, now I understand why for him, it's, I mean, you said it really well, Bryan. He's doing his job, but he is recognizing that being obsessed with the time and the details and all of that, that all kind of folds into how he's using his practicality to actually honor people in the most humane way that he can. This is his job. He has to do it. So he's trying to do it efficiently so that he can be humane in the process. And I did really appreciate that about him. It kind of showed those like strength notes in his character.
Yeah, I was thinking, and I want to first preface this to you two, is think of some other examples of even just seeing executions or seeing like justice being carried out in other media, because I've got a couple examples here. This movie came out somewhere between 7 to 10 years after the Tom Hanks adaptation of The Green Mile,
Mm.
another heart wrenching movie, an incredible movie, one that I hold in very high regard.
I know
And
exactly what you're going to say.
well,
Yes. Oh my gosh.
what I'm getting at is the honor that he's putting towards these men and women who have been executed. There's a character in that movie, played by David Morse, a big, tall guy with short white hair. His character's name is Brutal, and he gets violent with some of the other guards because he's saying the same thing, that yeah, these were criminals, but their debt has been paid. They're right with God now. So you don't mess around with their dead bodies. Then I start thinking about some other media. Very popular, huge, sweeping media frenzy for Game of Thrones season 1, and we have our Ned Stark character, who mentions like, "Hey, we're the leaders of the
Pass the
house,
sentence.
you
You
pass the
pass the
judgment,
sentence.
you
Swing the
pass the
sword.
sentence, you swing the sword." And how that's not an executioner's hood. It's no, this is the way that we treat the laws of our country, our area. Last year we covered Breaker Morant, where we have a questionable war hero who is then sentenced to firing squad, and how firing squad is, it's 7 men, or I guess traditionally it's several people, so you're not exactly sure. All of them are firing at once, and there's the idea that it takes away from who's the one that has the killing blow potentially. But we know that this has existed for so long, but this
Mhm.
movie is intriguing to us more so than it is macabre and dark. Even though this is a very gray movie, very dark in terms of color and tone, even though that's how it's presented, and the atmosphere of the movie as well is really quite dark and gloomy, is that even with this, none of our characters are particularly bright and joyous, but the tone of it is one of like high honor and respect. And when I was looking things up for this movie, there's lists and lists and lists of recorded history of the names of executioners, as in these are people following the the laws of the land, and hell, the laws of God. You carry out this, the crown and representation of divinity on earth, that like you are an officer of the Lord doing this kind of stuff. So I can kind of see how this could be seen with such deference. Brian, I want to bring this up. I want to focus on Spall as playing our lead here. What did he bring to this performance that allowed a generally dark and gloomy subject to feel like we're focused on the deference or the importance of this role?
One thing that British broadcasting typically brings to the table on a lot of things is everyone looks normal.
It's true.
Hollywood makes you think that every detective's gorgeous, every bit actor's the bad guy looks like the bad guy, the good guy looks like the good guy. Most British film says anybody could look like anybody, and this is to their credit. So Timothy Spall in this, and he could be just any guy on the street in
Hmm.
Great Britain, and I think that's really important for this because the anonymity that came to his job prior to Germany was really important to him. Like nobody
Yeah.
knows he was surprised his wife sorted it out. So the anonymity piece was really big here, and I think that really is the driving piece of this is how things came unraveled as he was known.
And he is a a normal guy.
Yep.
And like just a normal lad. And like I actually found that I was prepared for him to be morose and dark, and that even though he does find love and gets married, that relationship would be gloomy and that he wouldn't have any fun. But Lizzie, were you surprised to see like, oh, they go to the picture show together, and he sings with his friend Tish. They're having.
Yes.
I thought that was really welcome.
I loved the scene where he's singing in the pub because to me that kind of like exactly what you said. It brings a little levity, it humanizes him, and it helps you to see that this really is just a human being, whether or not
Yeah,
whether or not we agree with whatever side of the moral, like whatever side you're on in terms of his moral dilemma, he is doing a public service, like Brian said, and he's just trying to do his job. And in a lot of ways, like this was a job that he was raised in. So this isn't something that he went to, school for and then decided like I'm just going to do this at random. This was
yeah.
something that he was literally raised in this environment of having a family to do that. So for him this felt incredibly normal and he's just a normal guy trying to live his life.
At least in his piece, when he's anonymous, he has the solace of his service being what he's doing. And I actually agree with his mental state with that is I am simply doing what others has deemed acceptable under God. Like that's literally his piece in the whole deal. When he gets popular and people really start looking at him like someone who could actually affect change, like that's got to be harder because you've got moms who are literally saying, "Please spare my son." It's not me. Like
Yeah.
if I don't throw the switch, someone else does. Like you
Right.
think I can be like, I have become magnanimous. I will spare your child. Like that's not something within his purview. He's literally
Yeah.
just the guy there to bear the burden of doing.
I would argue too that I think when things took a turn for him, that is more when he had to execute Tish, because I think that he looked at his job as just that, as a job, like nothing more, nothing less. I think he cared about it being humane. But I think that I mentioned earlier, it's kind of like dissecting frogs. When you're doing it, you're not really thinking about like this like past life that this frog lived. I think that he's looking at that person probably in his own methods as if like they're already gone. Like this is just, I'm just trying to make this as painless as humanly possible for you. And I think that I have to imagine that for him, it became real when he saw somebody that he loved that was getting a sheet put over their head. And that all of a sudden it changed everything for him, where he said like, okay, I'm now I'm in the position where like I'm the one who desperately wants my, like that mother who's crying out for their son, like, please don't kill my baby. Like that's how he's feeling right now. You can see like the horror in his eyes of having to do what he's doing, but he's, in British fashion, stiff upper lips it and puts the sheet over and does his job. But I think that in that moment, that's when it completely switched for him, where he realized like, criminal or not, this is still a person, and somebody is going to be flipping that switch and cranking that switch, even if I'm not. But I no longer want to be the person that bears that burden, and I think that that's my interpretation of when things changed.
No, I definitely think that put a dent in his persona, but presumably he did a lot of executions after that, and it's only after they stopped paying him
That's
that he really
kind of what
quits,
I
right?
wanted to bring up, is that it is referenced about 25 minutes earlier in the movie, before you see that Jimmy is actually his old young lad Tish, who does his act with him. But they're having a discussion in their pub late night, and Albert Pierrepoint is saying, there's stuff going on up here. I'm holding on to some of these things in my brain. He says something along the lines of, I know that they're waiting for me, these thoughts. And that's such a chilling line, is that he's
It
been
is.
such a stalwart, vigilant, devoted person to this role. And he's done a pretty darn good job separating who Albert Pierrepoint is versus who the man who throws the switch is. But he does reveal a little bit that, like, it's not perfect, it's not forever. I can't just ignore what I do. And there are other people that know what he does, and we have Tish's lady friend who calls him out in the middle of the busy pub, like, "Don't touch me with those hands. I know what those hands do." And you
I would
points
have
over
said
at
the
his
same
wife.
thing back to her.
Ugh.
Oh my gosh.
What a universally
Sorry, I was
dislikable
like,
woman, by the way.
oh, dude, when that scene happened, I was like, look at this
Yeah. It was
word.
so, but he knew that those things were eventually coming to get their due, and he also had mentioned to earlier on. I think it's Officer Sykes, or whatever you would say, Charlie. He would say like, Charlie was the one who lost his nerve. He was the one
Yes.
who was the lead executioner in that early scene, and Pierrepoint has to kind of step in and like finish the job. And they're walking down the stairs and he's talking about what they just did, and he's like, "Well, no, I'm Albert. You're Charlie. We're gonna, get on the bus home. And we're gonna have a good night's sleep. It's fine." But like he couldn't handle it, and I guess that's really meant to show you that like this is a heavy thing. Not anybody can do this. And so that reminds me, Brian and I were having a discussion a little before the show. And feel free to abstain from this question if you want. But Bryan, could you do this? Could you be the one that has to pull the crank?
I think I could do it under his rules.
Yeah.
Like, I actually think that, when you talk about like the idea of people waiting for you after you pass, I think that there would be nothing but outstretched hands to shake his by his. I don't want to call them victims. That's the wrong terminology for what he's doing. I think that he, if you take into account ideas like Valhalla, where, as a warrior, you show up and everybody pats you on the back because you're a great warrior and you sit down and have your mead and whatnot. Um, a lot of what was thrown at him was, you'll get yours after the fact. I disagree. I think there's a line of people who did bad things in their lives who appreciate the death they were given based on his, credible way of doing it.
Yeah.
I don't think there was a dishonorable death for him.
No.
So I would say that I have no idea psychologically what it's like taking another life. I mean, being the one who physically does it. But yeah, I think under his work or his rules, yeah, I don't see a problem.
For the record, if anybody really wanted to, if you wanted to find it out, you can still look up the official Home Office table of drops, which is the exact measurement and style that was used for the Secretary of the Home Office, interior for the United Kingdom. Is like, yeah, we kind of know what we are doing here. Um, well, I'd say I think my answer would be similar, Bryan, except for that it almost seems as if it's a job for a single person, or like a young man or a young woman, like a single person. Is that the moment, like, you can, if you follow the rules and you learn the science of it, you can do it. That, like, you should be able to do that. But I think after thinking about it, is once you like start a family, or you find your wife or husband, whoever it is that if I had to give my like honest answer here, I'm generally the guy on the show. It's like, yeah, I can do that. I'll be the guy that opens the evil book. I'll press the button. I will enter the caverns of the dead. But I think I would be the guy that could pull the switch. But when there's another earthly corporeal devotion, you need to find your other half and devote enough of your time to him or her. That at that point, I think you have to leave the duty to king and country behind, and there's a next executioner in training ready to take place. Um, I, I
I
I'm a
I
little
think
surprised that he went for as long as he did. To be fair.
I actually think I'll go the opposite direction with you. I think the single guy is the one you worry about. What's he doing with his free time outside of this job? Um, yeah,
Well, it's
I
fewer
hear
secrets he has to keep from close acquaintances.
I get that, and maybe under the anonymity piece that's correct, but I would say that you'd almost need to rely on every friend,
That's true.
girlfriend, wife, child, to. I mean, look, this is we're still talking about taking human life here,
Yeah.
even if you're not the person passing sentence. I I don't want to say something's equally shared because who knows what a judge feels, what a lawyer feels, what all the pieces that go into a capital punishment is. And, for whatever it's worth for my argument, I actually believe in capital punishment.
Hmm.
But so basically, I do believe that there are evil people out there that should not exist anymore. So this being about someone who's simply performing the task of carrying out the sentence of others, like, I put no weight on that person,
Hmm.
me personally. Like, even if it was somebody close to me, it's not him. Like, that it's
Hmm.
not this guy. So
It's
I
like he
can't
adopts the
imagine.
mantle. Like, even if there's
Yeah,
no mask physically anymore, adopting the
right.
mantle of the executioner of the will of the state
Yeah,
is.
quite the opposite. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what point in time the mask went from the guy doing the killing to the one getting killed,
Right.
but
Yeah.
that that changeover happened at some point in time. So my overall piece is, I hold no judgment over the person who swings the axe. I mean, obviously, if you find out later he's a serial killer and he's just doing this extra job for his jollies, clearly there's some stuff to be said there. But in terms of this story and this man, like, no, like, cheers to him. Like, he's just doing civic duty. I mean, he's doing nothing more than, I really wanted to steer clear of using garbage man, but tax collector or meter maid. Like, this is in Great Britain at the time. This was a civic duty.
Yeah. Well, I want to. Speaking of the guy who swings the axe, Lizzie, what do you think about his diary, his little book that he writes the information in? Did that pique your interest, or did it make your eye twitch a bit? Like, no, what exactly is going on with this?
Yeah, it made me take a pause, because I think, kind of going back to that one line that you were saying, where he's like, I have my thoughts and they're waiting for me. It kind of almost felt as if deep down he understood all along how problematic, again, he is doing his civic duty, and I'm not here to bash that. I'm personally not for capital punishment, but I also can completely appreciate that this was completely normal at the time and that he was not a bad person for having this job. But I also think that we'd be remiss not to acknowledge, criminal or not, that it's still human life. And I think that deep down he understood the gravity of that. And I think that his ledger of sorts was probably partly him trying to pay respects for the dignity of human life. And maybe that's what I would like to imagine. But I think in some ways it was also his way of kind of keeping tabs on it, of being like, in some small way, I am responsible for taking their life, and I'm making this ledger for myself so that when the time is right, I'm ready to atone for it.
No, that's an interesting take. Yeah, it's a record for atonement later on. I think that's interesting. And we do
Can
get
I bring
some
this up
stuff.
real quick?
Yeah.
Did you notice the absolute lack of religion in this?
Yes.
Outside of the condemned.
Well, God, to me, I think, when you look, God is the reason why I'm not for capital punishment. I think there's a lot of, there's of course difference in opinion, but if you look at Romans 12:19, it's don't take revenge, but leave room for God's wrath, for vengeance is his to have. So it's, I think that is easily interpreted as there are absolutely evil people in the world, but it's not up to us to decide whether or not that they should or should not exist. And but that's going into a totally different can of worms. But I do think that I have to imagine that is why religion was left out of it, because I think that's when it gets really sticky and dicey, when in the context of execution.
Albert Pierrepoint, in his memoirs, because there was he survived till 92, so he was around, for record keeping, and he did write that eventually, and I think it's the tag at the end of this movie, is that he feels as if, well, capital punishment is revenge, and I know I'm paraphrasing there, but that it's interesting to know that he had written on a lot of this stuff on his own, or that he had recounted his story to people willing to listen and to write it down. There's some interesting truths about this. You brought out that the movie has a lack of God and religion in it. The last woman to be executed, that character in the movie, the part of the story is that she met with a bishop the hour before, and that's completely removed. In fact, her presence in the movie is just barely a tag. It's just the very last one before he has a discussion with Annie about not getting paid, which she'd brought up before. But there's some real thing, the idea that it almost seemed like it was built into the movie to make it more dramatic, but having to kill your friend, having to be the guy that throws the switch on someone. We all know that if you're from a small town, that local cop is someone that went to high school with the guy he's pulling over. right? That's not crazy to
Mhm.
think that somebody, in some county, the judge who's been elected, right, who won election in November, is going to be passing down sentences on someone that he personally knows it's going to happen all the time. But this is different. So the idea that's part of the true story that actually did happen, and
Oh my
that's
gosh.
why they did the kind of double act where they're singing together, because that's something that was real. They did that together. And I think there's a lot of biopic style movies that will give you embellishments, and this one seemed like it, but it's true. But here's one that is also part of the story that I want to ask you, Brian. When he was doing, it wasn't for the big Bergen-Belsen trials. It was for a different convicted to sentenced to death person. It was a German spy, last name Richter, who on the gallows, up on the scaffold, he charged a couple of the men and was trying to get out. And in his struggling, he knocked the noose loose, and it led to chaos. And no, Albert Pierrepoint was not like the man who pulled out his rapier and saved the day. He's a normal guy. That would have been a potentially exciting scene. Do you think we needed it, or are we happy with kind of the routine of how this movie went?
I think they did enough to show his general. I don't want to say it's like an OCD thing, but for use of the term toward what he was trying to go for, I think it works. No, I mean, especially when you get into MPs and stuff like that, like that's not something he would have been involved with.
Yeah.
He had plenty of military help. I will say this: something that I thought of while watching this movie, given the humanity he brings to these executions. There is something that I would have done if I were him, and I don't know if this actually happened or didn't happen or anything, but just a thought that came to my mind watching this movie is when talking to Montgomery about executing these people, I would have asked for a military commission as an officer.
He does get one bestowed. He didn't. I don't know if he asked for it,
Mm.
but according to the biography, he does.
Yeah. So my thing is, you talk about people surrendering their sidearms and stuff to, when defeated. It's more honorable for a soldier to die by the hand of another soldier.
Mhm.
So it would have been a thing for me if I were him to ask Montgomery, like, give me a field commission as a low ranking officer, so at least these people are dying by the hand of another soldier.
Yeah, he was given an honorary rank of lieutenant colonel.
There you
Um,
go.
but yeah, there's so many things that are very detailed and
They
accurate.
definitely didn't say that in the movie
They
because like
didn't.
that was literally something that watching it I was like, ooh, that's going to be a hard pill for a lot of soldiers.
That was done before the execution of the Bergen-Belsen Nazis, and
Good.
he did
I mean,
the women first, and then the two men at a time. A very important like relationship. Lizzie, you mentioned it with Lieutenant Llewellyn, the young man. I guess I mean he early 30s, but that guy being able to. I feel like without lecturing, that Pierrepoint is instructing or teaching all the people around him a subject that seems like it should be macabre, but every one of these conversations kind of ends with like a lightness or a I guess that's a way I can understand this in a way that's not so heavy.
Yeah, it really does bring some levity to it, and in the sense where whenever I think about capital punishment in this way, and ever thinking about, especially during that particular time, it's kind of one of those subjects that you just don't really want to think about, and whether or not it's such a touchy subject. But I think when thinking about it in the context of Albert, he really does have his formula, and in a way it's really he has, even if he doesn't appear to, it's really almost acting out of a lot of compassion, because he's trying to be like, this is what has to happen. These people have been sentenced to death. And like Bryan was saying earlier, like, I can't change that. If it's not me pulling the crank, it's going to be somebody else. And so he is kind of holding people's hands around him, kind of showing him how to do it, not only how to do it humanely, like actually pulling the crank, but also teaching them, these people need a coffin, like their debts have been paid, and kind of looking at that person's body and like their empty vessel as like somebody who is now pure and clean. And I think that I don't know, I really appreciated his perspective on it, because I do really feel like this entire movie, I found myself just being like, huh, like a lot of different times, and
Yeah,
just
I know what
constantly
you
just
mean.
being like, huh, I guess I never really thought about it like that.
Yeah.
But as a God-fearing woman though, like I really do appreciate that. Like we know like the penalty for sin is death, and that like their debt has been paid. So like they're right with God. I'm like, huh, I never really thought about it like that. And I don't know. I guess I really appreciated how he was able to weave in and out of different circumstances and really maintain a lot of dignity throughout the process.
Yeah.
So and hearing that so much of what he went through like actually happened, it just makes me have a lot of respect and compassion for the irony of it, is that he was taking life, but you really see how much he really valued it by the way he did it.
And the part where he takes over for Sykes, who is kind of bugged out and can't do it. That's similar to a true story too. He also, somebody also in a lead executioner role, actually showed up to the system is presented exactly as it was. As you're on a list, you get called in. There'd be like a senior person would be taking the lead. Well, the senior person during that time for one of Pierrepoint's first uh, calls out, had arrived, and he had gotten heavily drunk the day before,
Oh.
and had begun to fumble with the things that he needed to do, wasn't comfortable with his actually like pursuing the duties, and he stepped up. So in that case, it was a little more like, hey, this guy was like just on the active roster, backup QB's got to step up, and was able to do so. But
Keep Fitzgerald the hell out of that.
even yeah, even used that example though, is like he never drank while he did any of this stuff, but that didn't mean he was a teetotaler. When he was home, when he was back to being Albert Pierrepoint with his
Mhm.
friends, he could let loose a little bit. He could be a normal guy. But I think the quote he said was, "If you can't do this without whiskey, then you can't do this. Like this is not something you need to numb yourself down to do. Like you have to be able to compartmentalize and do this."
Mhm.
Brian, was there anything else about sort of this is a unique feel for a movie, for a lot of the things that we bring to the table, and this show moves us in so many different directions. But was there anything else about this movie? It could be behind the scenes stuff, or it could be about what we were presented, that you want to bring up before we get to our superlatives.
No, not really. My biggest piece on this movie is how well they did the very. There's a line that you can toe where you're making a film about killing without making a film about killing,
Yeah,
Yes.
and this is probably the most humane movie I've ever seen about killing.
yeah,
I honestly like I never thought about any of this. So you talk about 1930s Texas. You talk about various places in the U.S. who have used states execution rights. They talk about it with it's like, well, the Americans will just leave them hanging for 30 minutes to strangle. The Soviets are just going to line them up against a wall to be shot. All that's very accurate.
hmm
um, it's interesting to me because I didn't know there was like a science to hanging people.
yeah.
And
They even
I
call that a
yeah
hangman's fracture.
yeah I don't mean that jovially. Like I didn't realize that there could be a an ABC to humanely hanging someone. So, like you said, with the electric chair with the Green Mile
Ugh.
Ooh.
and that sort of point. So,
Yeah,
I
Lizzie,
mean,
I wasn't going there earlier because I
I
didn't
thought
want
that's where
to.
you were going. I was like, oh my gosh, that scene is so brutal. That
It's rough.
poor. Ugh.
so I mean, clearly we have shown a plethora of ways to not humanely kill
Right,
someone.
right.
To have it go back to 1933, where someone can do it the best way at the time possible, like that's an interesting piece. That's the reason I view this movie as more of a dramatic documentary than a drama film.
Yeah.
And no, not only do I find this a fascinating thing, but I feel like this is something that people can watch and take something on the best of what humanity should be.
That's a great way of putting that. This guy, through just kind of dedication and sticking through his uh, his morals, his ethics to this job, that he can and you can become the best in the world at something, which he was. I don't know if there's a camp. It's like you say something about Edison, and there's a bunch of people say, well, Tesla actually did it first. I don't know if there's an anti-Pierrepoint camp. Probably not. But the
Well, I
idea
don't.
is the
Outside the military, do we hang people anymore?
no, I don't think so. But there is something that you kind of touched on is the Americans who do it a certain way. Strangely enough, we talked about the Bergen-Belsen trials that are brought up in this movie, but after the Nuremberg trials, the job to execute the people that were found guilty there went to an American, a guy named John C. Woods, the master sergeant, who had nowhere near the experience of Pierrepoint. And strangely enough, the objective view from the media of the job that was done, that they said it was sloppy. The American did a poor job. One of the Nuremberg people, Keitel, took 20 minutes to die after the trap door opened. The trap wasn't
So
wide
he
enough.
deserved it.
Um, some people hit the edges as they fell. One person's nose was knocked off as they went through. So like the idea that the best person in the world to ever do it is not given the job that would be, post World War II, like kind of the thing this person was built for. That's I think that's another thing, is that this person is both an unsung hero, but a hero that is sung in the wrong way. The way that this movie presents, it's just such a unique character in world history. Lizzie, same question. Was there anything else that this movie kind of stirred up in you that you wanted to say before we got to superlatives?
No, I think I've really touched on all of it. I appreciate learning about him because I think that he had a job that truly was probably felt impossible. Honestly, I really
Mhm.
think that it, I think, we can have so many conversations on like, would we or wouldn't we pull the lever? But like, you can never, that's one of those things, like, you'll never truly know if you can until like you have your hand wrapped, like you have a grip on it and you're in the moment. And it's like, I feel like that job just would feel so impossible. But I said it before, like, I just really appreciate how a movie about him taking lives, also he was able to show how much he cared and valued for human life. And I just feel like that was just so interesting. And it was something that I never would have actually thought about, because you're absolutely right. The media and other movies that we watch that portray execution, just look at, you picture this like executioner, like this like big muscular man with like a studded mask on, and like you just like in a big axe, you just kind of think of like this
Out of my
almost like
dream.
subhuman person. And it's really interesting to think about that, it was a job. And I don't know, I appreciated the humanization
You know what else I
of him in the
appreciated?
process.
Speaking of the humanization, another thing that I appreciated was that I could have easily seen the relationship with his wife going really sour.
Yes.
We didn't know who Pierrepoint or Annie Pierrepoint was, but the idea that like even at the end she brings up the thing about the money again, and he nods and he says, I think I will write a letter. Like he listens to his wife. That's it's like he's a guy.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
He's not, I mean, yeah, there's one moment where he comes home, yeah, I stopped and had a drink, but like, he's respectful. It's just an interesting case study. All right, let's
Well,
talk more about
he's not only just a guy, but a guy whose wife isn't necessarily beholden to what he does.
Hmm.
Like I love the fact that she brings up the pub. Like even
Yeah.
though he keeps doing what he's doing, she brings up the pub, and the the only atrocity that I saw in this entire movie is the woman coming in and saying, the blood's not just on his hands, it's on yours, like throwing it at her. Like, not only is he, in my approximation, not only is he, doing a public service, but to really throw it at a woman also doing a public service. Like, there's a psychological baggage that comes along, even if you have perfect intentions on what you're doing. To be the woman behind that deserves tremendous respect. And as I'm assuming she's a philanderer. I mean, she's cheating on multiple people. At least that was what I gathered.
Yeah.
From the whole thing, I was like, wow, really? Like you're the person that are you're fulfilling no need. In this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing would be is that a very well done portrayal to be so unlikable
Yeah,
on
like
purpose.
there's actually nobody in this film that I liked least than
Jesse.
that woman.
Yeah.
And you see what his friend becomes based on that, which is also sad in its own, like not trying to knock on what he did. Obviously, that's the thing. But to go back to what we were talking about earlier, this is something I wanted to say. If face to face with the aspect of killing your best friend in that way, I'd almost rather it be me.
Oh.
Yeah.
I see why you think that. I could never, but I definitely appreciate why you're saying that, of like you would handle it with a lot of care and intention and respect and dignity, and you can't necessarily guarantee that others would. So I see why you would feel that way for sure.
The film took a lot of care to show you how he got to where he got. So under Pierrepoint's piece, he knows exactly where his friend got to where he got. And had the roles been reversed,
there is something very much about like almost like brotherhood there that I feel like we could maybe go on for a while on, of like who would be the person that needs to or could be best suited for it. But that there's some history to that too, in the biographies that um, if you look up the name James Corbett, he's described as James Corbett was an English murderer. All the rest of the stuff that we know about the character, like presented in the movies, well, you get boiled down to a master status, and his master status was murderer. This is a movie that I don't think while you're watching it, you're internally doing a lot of intellectual stuff, but it's only when we get to share like this that we're like, well, this movie really opens up a lot of things. And I do want to talk more about it, but in our superlative section. Are you guys ready?
Let's
Yes.
go.
Brian, I'm going to start with you. Who's the MVP of Pierrepoint?
I mean, it's got to be Timothy Spall. Like, he does a great job with this character. Empathy that he shows on his face while not showing real emotion is one of the greatest feats of acting I've ever seen.
Lizzie, who's your MVP?
Mine's the same. I think he did such a great job. I really to kind of just piggyback off of what you were saying, Bryan, I think that it's such a British tradition, it's like I said it before, like that stiff upper lip. That's such a thing of like, we're going to keep calm and carry on. And you can see he's horrified when he has to put that sheet over Tish's face. Like he's absolutely he cannot handle, you can watch everything happening on his face. Like he takes you through the emotional roller coaster of all of that. But then simultaneously, you watch him compartmentalize and just get it together. And I do agree. I think that had to have been so incredibly hard to play both roles at the exact same time. And I think he did fantastic.
I really had to like work Herculean effort into my synopsis because so many times during this, I was just like, I can't imagine what it took to like overcome this obstacle.
Yeah.
3 for 3. I'm also going Timothy Spall. And that's why I chose the movie, is he needed a chance to really shine. He's a memorable character in many of the roles he plays. This one, it's not so much a character, but, a biopic. And he does what he always does, which is brings the best to the screen. And this is a different role than what we see him in, but I thought he knocked it out of the park. So well done, Tim. Best supporting actor, Bryan.
I'm going to go with the wife on this one. You get an idea from the mother, the British aspect of humanity and family circumstances. But the wife is really the one that's like, even when she says, yes, I'll meet you at the movie theater. Like, there is a piece of this that works more humanely than in an inhumane film showing a rigid culture made it better.
I think that certainly her character matters here, but as far as like the portrayal of it, it's more so than just being dressed down and being in drab colors. There's something that, and I didn't grow up in the UK, but there's a characterization of what the British wife is here.
I've watched so many things based on not just war culture, but also from a personalized, this is what like boots on the ground regular British culture is. And so many of those portrayals come across as like, okay, hi there, now we're married. Like it's stiff.
Yeah.
And I loved just the piece of, I'm shy, I want to ask you out. Your coworkers keep
bothering us,
messing this up.
Yeah.
She gets it. And like it's so quintessentially British, but it's also like heartwarming in a way. So
I see what you're saying now. Yeah.
I love that compaction.
No, good call. Yeah, so that's props for Juliet Stevenson there. Who's your best supporting, Lizzie?
We're 2 for 2. I went with her as well. I thought that for her, she seemed, for a good portion of the movie, they don't even really talk about it. He's laying in bed with her and he's like, I have to talk to you about what I do. And she's like, I just put like 2 and 2 together. So it's kind of this elephant in the room for a little while of what he did. And then after he comes home, he's had, probably the roughest day at work. And they're getting into it with each other. They're fighting. And he's like asking her, do you want to know what it felt like to look in his eyes? And she's like, nope, stop it, stop it, stop it. And she's like wanting to put, she's basically like putting her fingers in her ears and kind of like the la, 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 like, I don't want to hear any of this. But she loves benefiting off of the like monetary benefits of it. And so she just, watching her have to try to do compartmentalization of her own because, she's just like any other wife who enjoys that her husband has a good paying job, right? And she's like trying to make they say that like everything that a man gives a wife, she'll take it and she'll multiply it and give it back to him. So, he gives her money and a house, and she's being able to turn that around and build a home. And so, but she's doesn't want to have to come to terms with the idea of like what he's having to actually do in order to get that. And I loved her acting in that moment. I felt like that was really great, where it was like the two worlds were colliding, the cars were crashing, and she couldn't stop it. And it was very interesting. And I had to give her props because that was a really fun scene to watch.
Yeah, it was really good. A kind of emotional peak of the movie there, I would say. For me, it's Eddie Marsan as Tish, and this is a 2005 movie. He looks really young here for the actor who I know that Eddie Marsan is not a young spring chicken. I first saw Eddie Marsan as an actor in the TV show Ray Donovan. Ray Donovan, about a LA fixer for powerful people, and Eddie Marsan plays his brother Terry Donovan, who is a boxer who doesn't have it anymore. So like on the tail end of a fighter's career. So I've seen him as a tough man actor before, but in this, I think I'm seeing something completely different. So I liked his performance, and obviously a pretty impactful character to how this movie has to go. Who's your hidden gem, Brian?
I think the main character really is. As someone who's never heard of this film, as someone who's never seen him in a leading actor role, I think this whole film is a hidden gem. Especially given the fact that it was so darn good. Like, this is a really good movie.
Lizzie, what's your hidden gem?
So we're kind of 3 for 3, but I put Timothy Spall specifically because we touched on this a little bit before, but I know him so well as like these kind of slimy, like Wormtail, or in Ella Enchanted, he's like Susan Sarandon's like little right-hand man, and he's in The Princess and the Frog, and he's just always in these childlike movies as this slimy, like the evil person's sidekick.
He's got that on lock. He knows it, right?
Yeah, like he is really good at it. He does it so well because he has this like innocence, yet he's still kind of sticky and slimy, and he does it so well. But I really enjoyed watching him in this role, not only just because it's such a departure, but it gave me an opportunity to really appreciate that he's a tremendous actor. Like, he's a really good actor. So that was really, really fun to be able to watch. And I feel like this movie gives him his flowers, because he's slightly underrated in those movies. So it's really easy to take the sidekick for granted, but I really loved that he got to be on the main stage in this movie.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
I want to chime one other thing here. Is his facial expression, his micro pieces of this are completely amazing. Like,
totally.
He does so much with so little in this film that it's about what your facial expression is when you throw the switch, not when you look back at your second.
Mm-hmm.
So, as he's throwing the switch with certain people that he's not necessarily sure of, he has a very vexed look. But as soon as he brings it back up with the second and the rest of the people in the room, it's full. Those are very specific things.
The real account of how Pierrepoint has to, pull the lever on Tish is that they do share a couple of niceties. And I think in that moment, right before he comes face to face with Tish, you are going through a dozen incredible facial micro acting kind of things, and it's a pleasure to watch. And then we all get to breathe a sigh of relief when he gets his faculties back, because he's kind of lost there for a moment, which you didn't expect from this character, and he gets it back really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was very well portrayed. There were two hidden gems. The first one was I have an affinity. I watch a lot of Channel 4. So I don't watch like the BBC main channels, but I watch a lot of Channel 4, which is BBC like humor and panel shows and stuff. And there's a very particular British accent I love that kind of sounds like a lisp. And so the Monty, the Field Marshal Montgomery, the character that played that had just a very charming accent that I liked. And it's sometimes redone. I think Mike Myers did a style of this accent for his character in Inglorious Bastards, but I really like that accent. And then I wanted to ask, just because, and I don't consume that much media. The only movies I watch are for the show, but we actually do have a Game of Thrones character in this movie. Did you guys recognize him?
No way. Oh, her?
Him.
Oh, him.
I noticed it right away, and this is from now 13 years ago when that season 1 came out, but it was a little later. Catelyn Stark's brother or nephew, Edmure Tully. That's Lieutenant Llewellyn.
No way.
Yeah, that's him.
Oh, I gotta go back and look for like Blackfish. Is that?
Yeah. Wait,
Yes.
no. It's the younger one. It's not like the gruffer Blackfish.
He gets married, the groom in the red wedding.
No,
Yeah.
the one that's kind of a tool.
Edmure Tully, yeah. I
Yes.
think he is kind of a tool, yeah. But no, he's there, and I was just like, I know this guy. What do I know him from?
That's cool.
I actually thought he was one of like because he's a tool. I thought he was one of like Jaime Lannister's cousins, but no, he's a Tully. All right, Brian, who are you recasting in this movie?
You know, I had a weird thing about this. I wanted to recast the best friend as somebody more, I don't want to put this wrong, but likable.
Okay.
We see that character in a lot of different things. It's like a weasel. I was thinking if you recast Eddie Marsan as Martin Freeman,
Yeah,
it would have
Oh
been
my gosh.
much
it would've
higher on the
been
likable scale.
way more impactful. Like it
I
would
was
have
this
hit
close
you.
to doing that too.
Oh,
Wow.
it would have
Wow.
hit you so hard. Like you
That'd
had
have been
Martin
rough.
Freeman in that spot. Oh, that would have hit you so hard.
That's the perfect recast. That's really, really good. Lizzie,
I
what's yours?
literally was this close to doing Martin Freeman. That's insane. I wish I could show you my phone so you could see it. Like that I literally have I have replacing Tish, but I went with Michael Sheen instead.
Okay.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But he's also Weasley. Like
Yes.
I wanted to replace it with somebody who, having his heart broken and driven to murder, you look at him and you're just like, no. You know what I mean? Like
Uh-huh.
I wanted someone that tore my heart out when you kill him.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That sounds really horrible for the other two actors. If you put a softer face to it, that's where it really digs your heart out.
Gonna hurt more.
They needed to make that hurt more.
Yeah. For me, I was thinking for our Jessie character, has Keira Knightley ever played an unlikable character? Because if she hasn't, then I think it'd be fun to have her here.
Gotta put her as a Nazi who gets hung.
Sure. Yeah,
Oh,
we'll put her as Greasa. Yeah.
First one up.
Uh-huh. Okay, Brian, what's your best shot of the movie?
Best shot of the movie was the sidelong shot of the gallows they had put up in that hangar. Because everything else they have done has been a not warm but close confined thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can think of a worse place to be hung than a wide open hangar. Like, I don't know if this is just me, but I was just thinking that if you're gonna be constricted to death, do it in a place that's already claustrophobic. Don't give me a giant open area and then hang me in it. Like, is that weird?
I don't think it's weird. It's fair
I
to
get
put
what you're
thought to it.
saying for sure. I mean, you do have like a sheet over your head, so there's like this you can't really see, but you do know. I get you
all
know.
of the lead up. Like they only put the sheet over your head like at the end. So everything that he does on his like checklist is based on a round room that might be 19 feet in diameter, and then they hang you. Then you get this wide, like it's
It's like a hanger, yeah.
thousands of yards open, and they're just like, here you are, whoop. Like I don't know, it just messed with me so much that you'd hang somebody in a wide open area and not a, like I'm sorry, I
Sure.
don't know if that's weird or not. Like, just that weirded me out.
Just write that on your bracelet. Like, there's no wide open areas.
No, hang me somewhere claustrophobic. Thank you.
Yeah. Lizzie, what is your best shot?
I loved the scene where it's, at this point, he has realized that he's going to have to execute Tish. He goes home, goes to sleep. He's now back at the prison, and he's walking over to Tish's cell, and he's fiddling with his keys. And I loved that scene because that shot, because it's what they're doing. It's like, at first, this is somebody who's super pragmatic, practical, logical. Everything's perfectly down to a science. He does this all the time. And now you're watching him, and he's completely shaken up, and he's, you almost feel like you can't decide if he's fiddling with his keys to try to stall and spare time to just gather his thoughts, or if he actually is that rattled that he can't find the key.
Yeah.
And it's probably a combination of both. But either way, I really loved that shot, because for the entirety of the time that's happening, there's a pit in my stomach, and you really are put into the position of, like, the director was wanting you to feel at least like a sliver of what Albert had to have been feeling in that moment. And it was powerful.
So we didn't know the story. We didn't know the truth behind the biopic, but I kept something had to happen in this movie, and when it's before he sees that it's Tish, when you can hear him singing the song, like "Jealous Heart," and that's when I go, oh no, because we
Who
didn't
is
know
it?
what his name
Yes.
was, but James, I can't remember, but like
But at the
that's
same time, how does he not know his name?
they called each other Tish and Tosh.
Tish Tosh.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's all fun and stuff, but
Yeah.
come on, man.
In high school, one of my best friends did not know my first name because our coaches all called us by our last names, and he thought my first name was Mel.
Aw.
You will find a litany of that stuff from Chad and Russell, but they all know.
They know. They know.
They all know.
For
Like,
me,
it's not that weird.
the best shot was I think POV shots are risky, but they definitely seem colder and darker when you're seeing the POV of like someone who's about to die, and you have this very rigid, like following the rules character. There's something very specific about the way that Albert Pierrepoint is staring directly at them before he puts the bag over their head, and you get to see that straight on. And I thought that was pretty impactful. A lot of
Yes.
times POV shots are running through the woods, something like that. But this was interesting. A good risk that paid off. Best scene, Bryan.
For me, it was the indignation of not having a coffin.
Yeah.
It's the epitome of the movie. I feel like that's really where you understand him as a person, because he's literally saying, this is unacceptable. We have killed these people. They were condemned to death. Like, it's not necessarily like accepting responsibility, but it's responsibility for the transition. And that
Yeah.
piece is important. And I agree. Like, I this is the piece where, I can't say I believe in capital punishment without understanding that the transition to the ground isn't important. So his stalwartness on that is completely understandable.
Yeah, and because he's so mild mannered most of the time, when he does get a fervor to him, that's really important.
Like, I
What's
will not bend on this.
yeah? What's your best scene, Lizzie?
I really, really loved that scene, but I went with, I mentioned it earlier, but the scene where he comes home from the bar and he has his big confrontation with Annie. I just feel like that scene was, honestly, you could have slotted out any job with that fight, right? Like that was such like a very typical traditional husband and wife type of kind of elevated argument of trying to, whether it's, because ultimately what they're fighting over is he's, having a crisis of conscience with his job, and the wife is trying to figure out logistically, okay, well, if this is what's happening, then then we need to go back to the drawing board and figure something out. Like that's kind of ultimately what they're doing, is saying like, we have a life, we have a home, we have to be able to figure out how we can keep the train moving, if that's really how you feel. Like that's a very common discussion between a husband and a wife. But what makes that fight so kind of gut wrenching is that what they're talking about is like the execution of human lives. Like that's
Yeah.
really what he's doing. So it's like you're taking something that feels very classic and mundane, and in a lot of ways it is. But when you apply like the actual context of the situation, like the dynamic, everything is changed. And it's, he's unable to compartmentalize anymore. Like his two worlds have completely collided now, and he cannot live in a world where he can play that game anymore. Like he is forced to face with the fact that ultimately, like home Albert and work Albert are one ultimately. Like he can't have them separate forever. And I thought that fight was really well done on both sides.
That's a good way of putting it. That's my favorite scene too, but it's the opposite side of the coin. Is that it's not the this could be any fight for any people. It's the reconciliation of the two Albert Pierrepoints, and it was something that he had always said, I'm not going to be this person at home, and he had convinced his wife that like, you're not going to accept that I bring that home. You don't let me bring that home. And she's standing fast, being like, we don't talk about this. This is not what I'm prepared to do right now. And yes, he's pounding his fists on the floor, and he's despondent. And I think the line is, tell me I'm not a bad man. And she says, I can't.
That was hard.
It was tough. So like this, that was another like real dramatic peak. So it got my best scene. Let's transition to best wardrobe or makeup, Bryan.
I actually like the starch color comment she made early on. It like,
oh yeah,
you only have so many suits. He truly doesn't wear that many suits during the whole entirety of this. I mean, this is a very, very traditionally British thing that they don't buy that many suits for what's going on. But now you're talking to generals and executing Nazis, so we're gonna have to figure something out.
Very important to look your level best. Lizzie, what's your best wardrobe or makeup?
I went with, I forget her name, but Tish's lover, the one that he ultimately ends up.
Jesse,
thank you. I love 1940s fashions. I just think that they're so like elegant and pretty. And so I loved her outfit, but what made me choose it was that it was like that burgundy, like almost like scarlet red. And, they really wanted you to know.
yeah, she's the only one in the movie allowed to wear a color.
No,
yes, exactly. Like they wanted it to be bright and vibrant, but then also, red is kind of such I can play like such a myriad of emotions, but of course, one of which I think is what they're really trying to go for, is it's very like a lustful color. And I think that was really what they were trying to go for. So they were sending kind of subliminal messages while also being like pretty and chic. And I appreciated that.
One of the pieces of this that I see constantly in film, and it's like very frustrating. It's like, oh, the one that's the bad guy is the brunette. It's not the blonde. It's always the brunette.
Like one
It's-
small differentiator.
Yeah.
For me, I think it's accessorizing with men's suits is something that can easily be done. You have to follow, I think it was Coco Chanel's advice, which is before you leave the house, lose one accessory. You got to follow that advice.
Less
So
is more.
I see men with pocket squares and tie clips and tie chains and all types of things, but there's got to be something about like the most understated badass accessory is when your pocket square is the hangman's hood.
Oh my gosh.
that for some reason just seemed very cool to
Ow.
me.
Don't see things anymore.
Yeah. All right. So a couple left. Brian, what one thing you would change from this movie?
The volume. I don't know if you guys hit this or not. Like, I bought this movie.
I had my TV up at 60. I normally listen to it
I
at 14.
Yeah, I had my volume at 55.
Yeah.
I watch everything else at 12.
There you go.
I don't understand why this movie was so dang quiet, but like I was like, am I missed?
This was really quiet.
I kept mashing the volume up like it was cool. Like I was like 30. Clearly, that should be fine.
Nope.
40. Please, dear God. 50? Really? Like I was like, I'm gonna max out. I'm gonna top out here in a minute.
And you know what? It's pretty high praise when the thing you want to change about a film is that it's too dang quiet. Lizzie,
No, it's weird.
What's your change one thing?
My change one thing is, and this is just like liberty that I would take just for the storytelling purposes. But in the beginning with Sykes, where he couldn't muster it up to pull the cranking of kind of getting sick and nauseous, and that's when Albert gave his speech about like, this is just a job, it's nothing special, I'm still Albert, you're still you. It would have been kind of interesting after he had executed at Ruby, where if or even during it, where he kind of had like a full circle moment where like he actually found himself getting sick. And I thought that would have been kind of interesting to be like, the thing that you once looked at is so like mundane. Now it's like you can't unsee it. He's seen behind the curtain of Oz and he can't go back, kind of thing after Tish.
Yeah, he comes in built as the consummate professional. So to see that breakdown a bit in a different way, I think that makes sense. For me, it's kind of a simple general term of embellish more. It was made for TV. It had a very particular goal in mind. It had a lot of good source material. So breaking from the historical record is that they didn't really do it. Like it was really, really secure in what it was, coming back to. But I was thinking if they had to embellish something, maybe he oversees a hanging gone wrong. Now, hey, it's been done, right? We talked about the Green Mile. We talk about other instances where the first chop doesn't get it. It's got to be the second chop or the third chop. And it's been done, but I think if he's overseeing like a young assistant executioner and he's like noticing something going wrong, then it would add a little more dramatic tension to this movie without tarnishing his reputation, which of course they did not want to do. This was made 15 years after he passed. So I think it'd be a safe way to be like, let's throw a little extra turmoil in here and we're not besmirching his name.
I like that.
Let's finish with our best quote. I'm going to start with you, Lizzie.
My best quote, we've talked about it a little bit, but when he's fighting over getting a coffin for the very last person that was being executed, where he said he's paid the price, he's atoned for his sins. Now what's left of him should be dealt with gentle dignity. just I think we've talked about it ad nauseum, but I just feel like that just really encapsulated his character, and I really appreciated that. That felt like a turning point for me, where I was able to. It felt like seeing into his character made my conscience kind of gave me permission to like him in that way. And whereas I was really on the fence beforehand, I wanted to understand him before. And after seeing that, it allowed me to see a little bit more into his heart. And I really liked it.
The gentle dignity line struck me as well, like the very first time. I thought that was a great line. My best quote is, "Now then, listen to me, Lieutenant. We're not interested. Do you understand? We don't care what they've done. They're human beings and they've got to die. That's all we need to know." I mentioned earlier, it's like without lecturing, he's just communicating how this job is done and how we go on living after we do it. Everyone he works with is trying to tell Albert about the bad guy that they are, or the bad woman that they are, or the bad Nazi that they are. He is stalwart throughout, saying, I don't care. Don't tell me any of this stuff. We don't need to know. They've got to die. They have been sentenced. We're carrying it out. That's it. What is your best quote, Bryan?
I like the fruit of my experience is a bitter, or has a bitter aftertaste. And I'm leaving off the end of it on purpose because I feel like you can't do, honestly, I don't think you can do anything without having a few bitter baubles in the end of it. But especially this job, it's never going to be a thing that you can be 100% certain of. Like, the judgments of man are never 100% infallible.
Sure.
So, especially with 608 people.
Yeah. Well, and there's also the bit that, like, I don't. There's not a single part of me that wants any controversy as to whether or not they learn after the fact that a guy was innocent or something like that.
Oh, of course.
That doesn't help this movie. It might help some other kind of drama.
And here's the thing. I wouldn't put that on him.
Of course not.
So it's one of those things where I like the partial quote of the fruit of my experience has a bitter aftertaste, because it's one of those things where you can't ever fully get behind something like this. I don't think there's a possibility that you can take a job like this and be like, I can be 100% certain all the time. And you can't fool yourself into thinking that this is, whether it's your first or fifth or whatever, it's gonna be bad at some point in time. It's gonna go wrong.
Well, let's get into our ratings for this movie. Audience, we use a 5-star scale. The lowest that we go is a half star. The highest is a 5-star. Lizzie, what is your rating for Pierrepoint?
I'm going to give this movie a 4. I think this is I think the movie was really well done. I think that it was really thought provoking. I found it tugging at my heartstrings, which 30 minutes into the movie, I was not confident was going to happen. I was,
Sure.
But towards the end of the movie, I felt really captivated by Pierrepoint's story. And ultimately, the only thing really from keeping me from giving it a 5 is that in all honesty, this is one of those movies that I would file under, I'm really glad I saw it, but I don't ever see myself revisiting it.
Yeah.
It's not the kind of movie that you watch for entertainment value, but it is a movie that I would recommend. And I'm ultimately happy that I took the time to see it, because honestly, had you not recommended it, I don't think this would ever...
Never
Not
known.
only would I have never watched it, I probably would have never even known that this movie existed. So this was fun for me.
Yeah. I would give it a 4 if I didn't stretch so many of my 4s lately. Last year or 2 years ago, my mark was, is this movie better than Coach Carter? And a lot of movies don't hit that mark. And so I agree completely that this is something that you should watch. to something that is, it's hard to say like, yeah, this is a movie you watch and it's not for its entertainment. Where it's like dramatic documentary. But I landed on a 3.5. I
Nice.
definitely really liked it. I'm glad that it was introduced to me. Like I said, this is my first time too. So yeah, I thought it was great. You have our movie selection for next time, Lizzie?
Yes. We're in that really amazing transitional time where everybody is getting ready for the holidays, but there's still some people like Chad, myself, maybe you all, who are still kind of holding on to spooky season. So next week is going to be perfect because we're going to go into some darker, less cheery Christmas themes, and then we'll save Muppet Christmas Carol and all the better stuff for December. So option 1 is Silent Night, Deadly Night from 1984. Little Billy witnesses his parents getting killed by Santa after being warned by his senile grandpa that Santa punishes those who are naughty. Now Billy is 18 and out of the orphanage, and he has just become Santa himself. Option number 2, The Ref from 1994. A cat burglar is forced to take a bickering, dysfunctional family hostage on Christmas Eve. And option number 3 from 1974, not to get confused with its other less favorable remakes, but Black Christmas from 1974. During their Christmas break, a group of sorority sisters are stalked by a stranger.
You have me at stalked. But honestly, I keep hearing about this Black Christmas movie. It's such a well-referenced movie, and I have not seen it. So we are going option number 3.
So excited. This is the first time I think that you've picked the one that I've seen and that I know I like.
Great. Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm
Good.
excited.
That's good to hear. Yeah, for sure. Okay. Well, I want to thank you both for joining me.
Yes. Well, thanks for having me. Again, that we would have never known if it had not been for you. So I love it.
There we go. And thank you, all the lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable. We invite you to reach out to us. We want to hear from you. Subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Pandora, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Give us a like on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter at movie_retro. Email us at retromovieroundtable@yahoo.com. Hey, producing and providing this podcast is fun, but not free. We invite you to support the show at our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/retromovieroundtable. Any contribution is much appreciated and will go towards making the show better for you, the listeners. As always, thank you for listening. Be good to each other and watch more movies. Lizzie?
Do not pity the dead, Harry. Pity the living. And above all, pity those who live without love.